Number 9, docket number 12-35-17, communication from the city regarding the Resiliency Task Force.
Mr. Chairs, Alex and the mayor come up to the podium. I just wanted to say a couple words. We're very excited to introduce this topic tonight to Planning Commission. So you're going to get the chance to hear from Mayor Summers, my colleague Alex Harnotes, and also our consultants from Rethink on the topic of resiliency. So Mayor, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you, as always, for your service to our community, as evidenced by your hard work and thoughtfulness tonight. Tonight, I, and along with members of the administration, formally introduced some very big ideas that should shape the strategic thinking regarding our community's strategic capacity for the next half century. A prologue. Some key thoughts are in order. Strategic vision creates a sense of destination. It is a very important element of defining the work ahead. It creates focus and it provides opportunity for measuring progress. Lakewood has a very strong community vision. It has served us well for the past 5 years. However, a combination of circumstance, opportunity, leadership, competition, extraordinary local expertise have intersected to place our team of planners, external experts, and me in front of you tonight. As the Pentagon has recognized, as it's thought long and hard about the world that it inhabits, it is highly likely that those societies who will thrive in the coming century will do so in no small part because of their ability to excel in a resource-starved environment. Tonight, you will hear about resiliency, what it is, and how it should shape our thinking. You will hear how we have benchmarked other cities whose thinking is far more advanced than ours. You will hear how we now realize that we are not thinking big enough here in Lakewood about our future and about our compelling need to shape it. You will also hear how we propose to organize our approach to this expanded thinking. You will begin to understand your critical role, your role, the Planning Commission, in leading and supporting this effort as it transcends decades of work. Long after each of us who are in this room tonight will likely be in this room. Here in Lakewood, we are on the cusp of making several hundred millions of dollars of private and public investments. We will make these investments over several decades. This includes our downtown, our sewer, our wastewater infrastructure, our water supply and distribution system, information technology, and our housing stock, just to name the big ones. We are about to experience here in our society, and probably across the world, a profound revolution in the technology of automobile transportation in the form of driverless cars and alternate energy propulsion that will compel them. We rely on a 60 to 80-year-old copper wire energy delivery system called wires through our backyards. The electrons go one way. The energy is produced somewhere else, travels to us to be consumed. And as we speak today, and we heard a little bit about this earlier, investments are underway to build the 5G network to help harness the power of the Internet of Things. Millions of dollars of healthcare investments are also underway right here in Lakewood. Smart homes and smart cities need engaged smart citizens to harmonize and take full advantage of the revolution ahead. Mother Nature will play a part. World geopolitics will play a part. Domestic politics will play a part. But the better news for us here is that locally we can play the leading part, and that is what we are initiating tonight. So I hopefully set the tone and piqued your interest, and Alex will put some meat on the flesh of what is really a great starting point for us. Alex?
Thank you, Mayor. So as the Mayor mentioned, we're here to introduce the topic of resiliency to you. We've chosen this word because it is a new word in many ways, and what it represents, we can sort of put the flesh on ourselves. So what is resiliency as we define it in Lakewood? Purposeful planning with a focus on resiliency will address the local effects of large national and global problems such as climate change, population growth, housing insecurity, rising healthcare costs, and many more. We intend to do this by looking at our community vision in a holistic and integrated way, in a long-term way, in a systems thinking way. And so resiliency is the ability of a system, in our case a city, to respond to shocks and stresses. So the shocks and stresses can come in several forms. These could be environmental shocks and stresses. Hurricane Sandy was a major shock to our electrical grid and to several of our urban systems throughout the city. So, environmental shocks like weather events certainly tax our municipal systems, tax our personal budgets, tax our municipal budgets. And thinking about building more robust and more redundant systems should be a focus of ours going forward. There are political and social shocks and stressors as well, both long-term and short-term, whether those are changing budgets and changing priorities from the state or the federal government that municipalities have to respond to, or social changes such as demographic bubbles. Do we have to build a new school or focus on senior housing? Immigration, what are the needs of our newly arriving residents? All these shocks, stresses, and changes need to be addressed in our planning in a holistic way. Economic shocks and stresses, both in the positive and in the negative. You see before you McKinley Place. Certainly that's changed the housing landscape of the city of Lakewood, as well as many other recent housing developments. All of the investment that is poured into the city in the last 3 or 4 years probably has been equally as disruptive to our city systems as the housing recession of 2008 and 2009 was. No matter the direction, harnessing that energy and planning for the future that betters all of our citizens' lives is a challenge. So why focus on resiliency? We believe that this holistic planning approach, this systems thinking, can profoundly influence the way that we design our cities, the way that we operate them, and the way that we govern them, and in turn influence the quality of life for our citizens. So in doing so, we would allow Lakewood to endure, adapt, and thrive no matter what sorts of shocks and stresses come our way, as discussed before. We can positively impact the most vulnerable in our community who are often hit first and hardest by these shocks and stresses. I think a great example of this, again, is going back to that power outage example. So a 3-day power outage for someone who's fairly well off might mean, a couple nights without entertainment or even a couple nights staying with family or friends. For someone who's more on the margins, a freezer full of melted groceries might bust the budget for the month. It affects them more impactfully. And for someone, say, on oxygen or reliant on in-home medical equipment, a 3-day power outage is a life-threatening emergency. So building a more robust electric grid, just as one example, certainly benefits all of our citizens, but the most vulnerable certainly accrue those benefits in a very meaningful way. So why are we bringing this to you, the planning commissioners? It's because you're the keepers of the community vision. And we believe that the outcomes of this effort will reinforce and overlay the current community vision as our master plan document. So we took the current community vision and we benchmarked it against some of the best plans in the country and some of the best planning frameworks in the country. And one of the planning frameworks that we really like that's very focused on this idea of resilient cities is called the eco-districts model. Our friends and colleagues at Rethink will talk a lot more about that. What I'll tell you is that the eco-districts model identifies 23 what's called objective categories, which they measure and benchmark cities against when it comes to resiliency. So we took these 23 objective categories and we tried to match them up to the focus areas of the vision. And as you can see, some of them fit rather nicely, rather cleanly. Some of them are things we're not used to thinking about. When it comes to things like materials, what are we using in our infrastructure projects or in our building projects? Certainly that doesn't fall just under commercial development. It also goes into mobility, how we build out our roads, and housing as well. But for the most part, we felt these were the best fit when it comes to the focus areas. I would say the bulk of the plurality of the objective categories fall under the bucket of community wellness. And these, again, are some things that we do very well and that we plan for already, and some that we don't necessarily spend as much time thinking about. So what we did as a planning staff this summer was take all of the adopted plans that undergird and support the community vision that the city has adopted since 2004. We pulled out all the goals, objectives, recommendations, and we sorted them into these objective categories to see essentially where we're planning already, where we're executing already, and what sorts of things resilient cities are doing that Lakewood is not necessarily thinking about yet. So, as you can see, there are categories such as active living, where products of past task forces or past planning efforts, we spend a lot of time thinking about active living. Clearly, we spend a lot of time thinking about the mix of uses in public spaces, about mobility, about safety. These are the bread and butter of the existing community vision. There are other places, objective categories, where we don't spend as much time thinking about them up until today. Things like innovation. What is the future of X? Things like energy. We've largely left the power grid and our energy systems up to the utilities up until today. And then, of course, emerging categories like climate and risk we haven't thought about quite so much up to this point. So one thing that we will ask our Resiliency Task Force, which I'll talk about in a few moments to do, is consider these gaps in our current planning efforts and try to create objectives, goals, and measures that will bolster our existing planning efforts and fill in these gaps. Those created objectives and the existing ones that you see up here will be put together into an implementation framework, a systems thinking approach, a prioritization based on return on investment that will guide the implementation of projects supporting these ideas for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So, a couple of concrete examples. And none of these are to say these are things that we are doing. Well, in a few cases, they're things we're already doing. But this isn't to say that these are the recommendations. The task force, the next 2 years of effort will set those things up. But these are things that we could do. So mobility goal number 3 of the community vision, which you're all familiar with, is to increase the number of miles traveled using means other than a car. So we could approach this with a number of different programs and tactics. One thing we do already, sidewalk repair. The pedestrian network is an important part of our mobility network. Keeping our sidewalks safe, level, and accessible for all of our citizens and visitors is an important part of that mobility network. I would venture to bet that if we put this into our implementation framework, sidewalk repair would have a great return on investment. Similarly, expanding our dedicated bike network expands the capacity of streets, builds into that 8 to 80 cities concept of helping the most vulnerable, those who perhaps can't afford or aren't physically able or due to age are not able to drive. Moving on to sort of more aspirational approaches, a program like electric car sharing. There's a lot of talk about mobility as a service rather than mobility as something you buy and hold in a single occupancy vehicle. You know, thinking about the next 5 years of mobility certainly would include things like electric car sharing. And thinking about the next 10 or 15 years of mobility, got a little stuck there, could consider something like a self-driving community circulator. This is not something that's going to happen tomorrow, certainly, or even next year, but it's something that we'll ask the Resiliency Task Force and ask those who are working on this resiliency effort to consider and keep on the horizon so that we can be prepared when technologies like this do mature. So that community vision goal, increase miles traveled by means other than a car, is a noble one and somewhat measurable, but we want to solidify measurements for all of these objective categories. And my suggestion for mobility would be to measure the number of miles traveled by single occupancy gas-powered vehicles and to try to drive that number down using programs and tactics like the ones that we described before. So looking at this in the positive, in a number that we can impact, and show a meaningful measurement on will be an important task of the task force and of this resiliency effort. Just to give one more practical example, safety goal number 1 of the community vision is to preserve the rapid response time of safety forces. A lot of things go into response time, a lot of things go into emergency services, clearly. So how could something like supporting universal design help to drive response time? A lot of our, well, not a lot, but a portion of our emergency services time is spent on wellness or well check-ins on seniors, or slips and falls, things that could be avoided, say, if there were universal design, more accessible homes available in the city. So, for instance, we have rebate programs through the Planning and Development Department. If we supported a rebate program for home rehabilitations utilizing universal design, keep more seniors in their home, keep them safer, improve response time. Similar, there are cities who operate a senior check-in service. Parma Heights, for one, has been doing this since the mid-90s. Every day, automated call goes out to seniors who have signed up for the service. They check in. If they're not responsive, that's elevated to a call by a person or a visit by emergency services. So by automating just step 1, you can save more on the back end. Another suggestion that's been popular around the city is a volunteer framework similar to the H2O program to help seniors, retirees, remain active and engaged in the community. We already have this framework built. It works great for high schoolers. We believe that with some tweaking, it would help to keep that population active, engaged, and especially physically active, which again could help out with the ultimate goal of reducing the percentage of well-check calls and helping to preserve response time. So those are just 2 sort of examples of how we intend for the Resiliency Task Force and for this effort to develop that sort of both inside the box thinking and big dreaming. The goal of the task force overall will be to take the existing goals and objectives of the community vision, tie them together with a systems thinking approach, see how they can reinforce and augment each other, and come up again with that roadmap for implementation that we can use to move these efforts forward. So we'll do a little bit more nuts and bolts about the task force in a few minutes, but I wanted to introduce our friends and associates from Rethink Advisors. Rethink reached out to us some months ago. They are a consulting firm that spends a lot of time thinking about these sorts of big ideas, and we have engaged them to assist the task force and to put some form to their efforts. So who's going to start off? I'd like to introduce Irwin Lowenstein from Rethink, who will introduce the rest of his team.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to sign in?
No, you're presenting it as part of the city, so that's fine. We know we can find them.
Oops.
I was just using the regular mouse.
Alex, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Michael and I have some prepared remarks and some slides to show you, but I'd like to say before I even start how gratified and excited we are to be working with the City of Lakewood and to be here tonight. I'm hoping that this will be the first of many meetings that we have with Planning Commission, so we're looking forward to working with you. And I would be remiss if I didn't say how much I admire your mayor and your planning staff. We've only known them all for a couple of months, but I can already tell that they are forward-thinking, future-thinking, thoughtful, and innovative, exactly the kind of people that we like to work with. And I think in particular, Mayor Summers said at one of our first meetings that
he sees opportunity in challenge, and we do too. So I'm Irwin Lowenstein. I'm the president of Rethink Advisors, a Shaker Heights-based consultancy. With me tonight is Michael Peters, who will be speaking with you in a moment. And in the middle is Puck Nickleby. Puck is also a member of our team. I'll tell you about him in a second. You could always tell Michael, you'll remember Michael because he's the one that got the good hair genes. The other two of us, you'll remember, didn't. Okay, so Rethink Advisors is a strategy consultancy that lives at the intersection of purpose-driven planning, urban design, architecture, sustainability, and resilience. And you'll see from our team that we have a lot of complementary and different skills in all of those areas. We advise cities, suburbs, anchor institutions on complex projects at a district scale, and those that are seeking outsized impact and progress in solving apparently insurmountable challenges. In doing so, we bring new and alternate perspectives and understandings to every project. Irwin Lowenstein, I'm an architect and planner, graduate of Carnegie Mellon University. I have 35 years of professional experience, and I have special expertise working with anchor institutions and cities. Puck Nickleby is a retired Marine colonel and fighter pilot, fair warning. Puck is retired from the Marine Corps, but he served under Admiral Mullen in the Joint Chiefs of Staff doing strategic consulting for the military, serving under in special ops. And Michael, who will tell you a little bit more about himself, is an investment banker who worked in Chicago, New York, and London, now returning to his hometown in Cleveland, and he's a sustainable real estate and construction consultant. I think the story about what brought our team together is kind of interesting because in this case, it was also what caused Bryce and Mayor Summers to contact us. Puck Nickleby was brought to Cleveland 4 years ago to form an institute at Case Western Reserve University around sustainability and resilience. And his main task was to write a book. So with his colleagues, he wrote this book, The New Grand Strategy, which we call a business plan for America. It was born based on Puck's work at the Pentagon. And it embeds the idea that sustainability and resilience should be the United States' national strategic imperative. Puck finished the book, it's been published. So we met at Case Western Reserve University. We've done planning work for Case Western Reserve University, as well as the communities around University Circle. We've now been engaged for work with Cleveland Neighborhood Progress for neighborhoods within the city of Cleveland, and we're just about to start work on the transformation plan at Metro Health on the near west side. So we believe that society's most vexing challenges are not simple problems, and they're not short-term problems. In fact, they're characterized by long-term complexity, and what I mean by that are webs of interdependence and interrelationships of constituent parts and systems. All of the systems that Alex described, for which your city has done incredible planning, all have actions and reactions with each other. And we believe that you can only do real planning and get a real perspective of a city if you look at everything in an integrated fashion. In that way, you'll find embedded opportunities, and you'll also be able to see unintended consequences more clearly. We also believe that although Lakewood is a strong community, it has challenges, and like many first suburbs in our cities, Lakewood has patches of advantage and disadvantage. We believe that that should matter to all of us, and that a resilient city and a sustainable city is one where everyone can thrive, even, as Alex said, even the most vulnerable. And we believe that these kinds of problems, systemic in nature, require systemic solutions. And Michael is going to tell you a little bit about the planning framework that we deploy to create solutions. But I want to reinforce this idea of systems thinking. Our approach is characterized by holistic systems thinking, and also, like design thinking and like nature, incorporates transformation and regeneration through adaptation and feedback loops. You can think of problems that you've solved. Simple problems can be solved in a linear fashion. Cities are complex systems. In fact, I describe cities as systems of systems. So linear problem solving doesn't work. We approach problem solving in an iterative fashion where you're constantly coming up with ideas, testing them out, iterating, assessing them, and adapting. And that's how you create better systems. So what we're seeking is a city with resilient systems. I would add, I think Alex's definition was terrific. I would add a few thoughts. We're looking for systems that are reflective, meaning that they're evidence-based. We're looking for systems that are robust, meaning that each one is designed, over-designed, so that it can withstand shocks. We look for systems that are redundant, in other words, systems that are diverse, so that there are multiple ways of solving problems. We desire systems that are flexible, meaning ones that can evolve over time and adapt. We look for systems that are based on inclusivity. The fact that Mayor Summers and Alex and Bryce said from the outset that they want the Planning Commission involved, they want a task force involved, and they want this to be open to all citizens in Lakewood, is something that resonated with us, because we believe that only with broad consultation can you get really resilient systems. And lastly, as Bryce indicated and as I said, we believe that all systems have to be integrated. You have to look at this broad array of objective categories to come up with a resilient city. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's going to talk about our approach.
Thank you and good evening. In the interest of time, I'll try to keep a 3-hour conversation to about 3 minutes. But suffice it to say, it's very helpful to put what we're talking about into a context that may be more familiar. So in prior planning processes, you may have said to someone, we'd like you to build this to a LEED Gold standard or something like that. So you've used a framework, which is a common language and a set of best practices to try to get an idea across and to try to affect some change. So eco-districts is very similar in the sense that it's a framework, but in this case, we're not talking about one building or something in the built environment. We're talking about an entire district and really the strategy around doing that. So it does go back to the previous slide where we're talking about strategy, but then getting down into the operations and the tactics that we'll employ. And eco-districts is fairly new. It was born out of the Office of Sustainability in the city of Portland, Oregon, but spun out as a separate organization a couple years ago, and the protocol only came out last January, so it's less than a year old, but has been formally adopted by 13 different districts around the country. Metro will actually be the 14th when we announce that. But it's really a collaborative and performance-centric development model. So really designed to do a couple things, and I will read directly out of their materials because I think it is very relevant to what we're talking about tonight. So drive innovation, attract talent and investment, support historically disenfranchised communities, embrace cultural integrity, enhance prosperity and opportunity, and respond intelligently to climate risk and environmental and health degradation. So it's really very encompassing, but through the process that we go through, which I'll get to in just a second, we really kind of break that down into very manageable chunks, and that's what we'll be helping the Resiliency Task Force to do. But really here, our goal is creating an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economy for Lakewood and the region. So this looks complicated, and it is slightly, but really what we're talking about here is driven by something really fundamental. So on the left, you see the purpose drivers. So equity, resilience, and sustainability. And Alex did a great job of really going through and touching on all three of those points and what we've talked about before, but everything we talk about is viewed through that lens, right? So if we're talking about any of the strategic priorities, if we're talking about livability, then we're going back to the points about equity, resilience, and sustainability within that. So those really drive what we're trying to do. And we really think that's important because they're all interlocking and mutually reinforcing. So they're both present and future focused, which I think is very important in the planning process that we're talking about. And what we found out is that cities that embrace equity, particularly acknowledging those among us most vulnerable, providing the broad-based opportunities that go along with that, are really have achieved stronger and longer-lasting change. And that's what really we're trying to achieve. Same thing is true with resilience. And then, when it comes to cities that build a pathway to carbon neutrality, really achieve positive impact on community health and sustainability, again, beyond just their local boundaries. And that's what we're really trying to look at. So as just a quick example, so if we may talk about district energy, so maybe that's a microgrid. There's a lot of district energy concepts. Could be a microgrid, could be around mobility, things of that nature, but we tend to think of them in very linear fashion. So when we talk about district energy, that falls under resource regeneration. How do we deal with the energy that we're producing and consuming? So that falls in our objective category of energy, and then we design programs and tactics around that. So, makes a lot of sense and a lot of common sense. But when we look at it really more holistically and through this eco-district framework, what we find, if I can go to the next one, is that we really are driving a lot of change throughout the system. And so we can really move it back and say, okay, well, that energy also impacts, our smart city digital network. If we're going to build a parking garage, should that be a EV to grid parking garage so we can basically store energy and use EVs to store energy? It hits on innovation. It hits on, all these other aspects that we really have to think about because, as Irwin said, there are these unintended consequences that can show up. And when we take this more holistic view and put it through this framework program, then those become more readily apparent. So this is what we're proposing to do with the task force, help them work through this process. Certainly not as all-encompassing as this within a couple months, but really trying to hit on some of these main points to begin with and go from there and see how it goes. So if you have any questions, we're happy to address those, or I'll hand it back over to Alex.
So that's a great introduction to the way that Rethink sees the world and the way that they've helped us to form these ideas. So what exactly are we going to do in the context of Lakewood? The approach that we've decided to take to this effort is to form a task force, as we do for many things in the city. We're looking for 9 members to this task force. There'll be 5 council appointments, 4 by the mayor. We've reached out to over 30 organization heads in the past week to ask if they have Lakewood citizens who would be willing, able, and prepared to serve on this sort of board. We're prepared to make personal invitations to citizens that we know are interested in these issues or that work in these fields. And basically, we're taking suggestions. So we hope to form this core group of 9 members. And we anticipate that in addition to those 9 members who will meet, something like monthly over the next 18 months to 2 years, that there will be working groups, there will be, subgroups interested in particular categories or subcategories that may sort of break off of that 9-member core task force. We're going to continue that analysis of the community vision and of our other adopted plans, ask the task force to fill in gaps in those goals and objectives. We're going to ask them to find alignment between the existing plans, how they can reinforce each other, and as always, collect public input. Finally, we're going to ask them to develop strategies and priorities based on the sort of systems thinking analysis that Rethink will be able to guide them through and bring to the table. And the final deliverable will be that framework, that roadmap containing those strategies and priorities, and a guide for implementing projects. It'll involve budget guidance and cost comparison. Again, what projects have the greatest potential for return on investment as far as benefit to our citizens. And ultimately, we see this as some sort of update, addendum, refresh of the community vision itself. And that's really why we've brought it to you as the planning commissioners. Whether this ends up being the community vision refresh after 7 years, or if it's an overlay, we're not sure exactly what will come out of this, but we are confident that it will impact long-range planning in the city of Lakewood in a profound way going forward. So with that, I suppose I'll take your questions.
I have one question. Why can't they be, at one point I saw the discussion such that the resiliency and the community vision were fairly autonomous entities. And then at this point, you're talking about, moving them down into updates, addendums and that. Can't they coexist as a document as the community vision, which is supposed to be and has been, a living, breathable, malleable document that purports the evolution of the community?
Yeah, I think that would be the ideal, to be honest with you. We've spent a lot of time discussing it, and I think that the way to really enshrine these ideals and give them continuity within city administration is to make this the community vision or a substantial part of it. The community vision was formed by a wide array of citizens that were in this room a long way before me, so I don't want to assume anything for them, but I think that we're thinking along the same lines. I would love to see that enshrined and solidified.
I mean, it seems as if they end up, if they continue or stay as two separate entities, one of them ends up on the shelf collecting dust.
No, I tend to agree.
Alex, you mentioned that there's 9, and you mentioned, described it as a core team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect more, what kind of public input you have? I'm just going to say, Lakewood is a place where it's in our DNA, and lots of people showed up for the community vision, and there was, even years before that, we had a Citizens Infrastructure Committee that asked some of these same questions. Didn't make a lot of headway, but asked a lot of the questions. What do you anticipate beyond the core members to be opportunities for people to participate?
Yeah, certainly. So I would anticipate that for, what we normally call public input, workshop sessions, specific meetings around resiliency or around a or a number of resiliency topics. But beyond the 9 core members, frankly, we've already had more interest than that. And so what I anticipate us saying to some of the folks who apply for appointments is, we don't think you're the right person for the appointment, but when we start to talk about energy, can we call you? And for them to be joined to the group for a specific time or in a working group. And maybe it is to inform that public workshop on energy as a particular focus area at a certain place and time. So I think some of that remains to be seen, but that's sort of my vision for it and what we've discussed so far.
We have a lot of planning-inclined people in this community.
Yes, we do, to our great advantage.
Yes, including former members of this commission who are very active in things. And so that's terrific, yeah. If you can harness that energy, we're going to go a long way.
But to Lou's point, I mean, I think going down the line, big picture, if those people aren't engaged, there'll be a lot of umbrage occurring because they want to be engaged with the input on the line, for sure.
That's certainly something to keep in mind is that engagement has to happen early and often. So definitely noted.
Any other questions for Alex or the team? I'm gonna ask the mayor if you have a copy of your remarks, because I'm gonna need them when we're negotiating with EPA. They were terrific. I mean, the mayor, I'll just say, Mayor Summers, this seems like fulfillment of a lot that you've been involved with personally, but that the city for the last 20 years has gone on, back to the Grow Lakewood Committee and so many other efforts. And you have been very eloquent in negotiations with EPA and in other contexts of talking about getting ready for our second century, and that Lakewood can do that and should do that. And that has actually had strategic benefit in creating the space for us to try to articulate our own goals, where we want to go, without an EPA telling us, here's your $400 million program. So I appreciate that. I really would like a copy of those remarks.
Sure. If I could just add a couple points to show you how serious we are. Internally, we've garnered $50,000 of our economic development funds to support our relationship with Rethink. We're going to use that as a starting point to solicit other funding sources, including foundational support. We believe, especially with the encouragement of Rethink, that we can show the way for the region and provide some significant leadership, certainly for our community, but perhaps for other communities as well. And therefore, we might be deserving and successful in getting additional support financially. This is going to be an enormous amount of work. It's going to require a lot of citizens. And if the idea that we're going to expand decades with this work means that those 9 are going to be swapping out over time. So we're going to need to build the big 10 underneath, because these folks, first 9 in, will work hard and they'll move out. Another 9 will come in, and we'll need to have those folks ready. So it's going to take an enormous amount of facilitation. But I think with the potential of the investments that are already on our obligations, to shape even half of them by increments could be transformational in terms of how we think and behave, as opposed to the conventional looking backwards, this is the way it's been done. So and your role is important here. Mayors come, mayors go. Planning staff generally comes, stays longer, we hope. The directors come and go. They are appointed at the will of a mayor. But this idea must not come and go. This idea and the context of it must stay. And frankly, it's our collective opinion that the only way we can assure this kind of generational focus is with the Planning Commission. Your 6-year terms are important. Your citizens, you're not subject to the political whims. You're doing the hard work of protecting land use and applications and major investments. So this body, I think, can more than any provide the continuity. You will start this. Future commissioners will have to understand the expectation of the role. That's a very different role historically in planning commissions. It's a much bigger role, but one that I think is very exciting. So we start tonight.
And just to add, I mean, for the administration to be doing this, and I think about, like, if you look at the cities in Ohio, right? Columbus got that, I think it was the U.S. Department of Transportation Smart City grant, because of the groundwork they laid with things like this, right? It doesn't just, the Department of Transportation didn't just go to Columbus and say, here's all this money to do this really great implementation for the future. It took something like this to tee them up to get that. So I think the fact that the city is laying the groundwork for this is really going to set us up for opportunities like that, both government, federal government, state government, and foundation-based. I think that's incredible.
And in the interest of full public engagement, transparency, we have 2 members of the audience who have sat through all this, and we'll open it to public comment. If you want to join in, we're glad to hear from you as well. Same, please state your name and sign in.
Miles Murray, 8308 Lake Avenue. I'm actually a Clevelander. My company is Better Together Solar. We met with the mayor a while ago to talk about resiliency and planning, and I think a lot about solar as one of the engines in the resilient network of energy. I did a simulation recently looking at a hospital, and hospitals, because it came up for the Metro Health strategic plan, the hospitals have to keep on hand 96 hours of fuel at their full capacity for their generators. And with a solar system that fit on this simulated hospital, it went 102 days without needing to be refueled. And it just, that idea that that there's these engines that are already available, that the fuel is free, and that those things make money on a day-to-day basis. But then when the catastrophe strikes, they let you recover quicker and longer. And that's like a street light that goes out requires a cop to be there directing traffic. A street light that has batteries to back it up does that for several days, but a street light that has solar panels and batteries will stay on forever and never need anybody to be there. So your savings is much more than what you saved on electricity by powering it with solar. So that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Thank you for that comment.
I'm Tony Cimino. I will have lived 32 years at 17609 Lakewood Heights Boulevard in January. And I went to St. Augustine when it was a high school, not an elementary school. However, I am also the Director of Human Services for the City of Lakewood, and I feel strongly that any planning process that involves the community vision, Human Services should be paying attention to that and making sure that our thoughts and the points that are important to the daily work we do are brought to the attention of the people who make decisions. So I appreciated the presentation today, and I particularly appreciated it because there was reference to so much of the work that we actually are doing already every day. So thank you. I'll be at other meetings.
Thank you. So will we. So- All right, any other comment or question? Okay, that's item. That would be the last item, although I think I want to make mention of, and thank